wanted to make a video talking about some of the thoughts I had while I played Life is Strange episode 5, since I did not get to do any commentary for the playthrough video. I will also discuss some of my past theories, as well as any new theories that I have about the overall lesson or theme of the game. Obviously, there will be spoilers. The theory that Mark Jefferson chose his victims based on innocence never sat right with me because it always brought up more questions. What is innocence to Jefferson? Why innocence? How can some of the victims be lumped together, namely Rachel, Kate, and Victoria, who are clearly all very different people? The answer ends up being a little more complicated than that, but long story short, innocence for Mark Jefferson is a naive hopefulness in his students, the kind of innocence present before we experience some of the harsher realities of adulthood and before we become cynical. But that is only part of the equation for the darkroom. He needed his subjects to be innocent only because he wanted to capture the very moment that innocence is stripped away from them, when innocence evolves into corruption, the loss of innocence. I'm glad my Nathan Prescott theory is confirmed, although while that may be the case, being a victim himself doesn't negate what he has done, or the fact that he does deserve to suffer the consequences of what he has done. I'm glad they used the very little screen time they had this episode to make him a completely rounded off and more understandable person. I'm also glad that regardless of the ending choices given, Nathan still essentially tries to atone for what he's done and ends up suffering some real consequences. I'm sad for him, but I'm also sad for his victims. We don't get to know the situation with Rachel and Mr. Jefferson. He says Rachel loved him, but I don't know how much I'm willing to believe from him at this point. I'm disappointed we don't find out any more about Samuel or who Twilight Zone is, as well as all the other smaller mysteries in Arcadia Bay. Max winning the Everyday Heroes contest for me was a hopeful glimpse of the future. I wish we had real confirmation that this is something Max would have worked towards in the future after everything is finally resolved in Arcadia Bay. I can't help but wish there were a way Chloe did not have to die so that she could have grown and actually lived free from the burdens of the loss of her father and Rachel. I discussed in my theory video about Chloe that if she did have to die, I hoped that she at least had the opportunity to think beyond herself, to appreciate Max and the people around her truly, and to just realize that she's loved. In a sense, she does get to this place, which I felt was much needed growth for her character. I had said many times that I hoped the ending does not come down to some kind of choice between saving Chloe or letting her die, so obviously I was a little disappointed. But here's how I think the ending was set up to be quite powerful. Dontnod set us up to be very invested, not just in Chloe, but also in everyone else in Max's life. Max started off the week with very few friendships and very limited viewpoints of people. Only when you get to know a person do they become a complete person. Only then is it easier to relate to them and empathize with them. The other characters around Max started out almost as shells of themselves, fitting into different archetypes. The gorgeous cheerleader, the dumb aggressive jock, the nerd or science geek, the queen bee or the bitch, and so on. The intention was always to subvert from these to understand that people are more complicated. Dana is the gorgeous cheerleader, but she's also a kind and supportive friend, a good person, and she still has her own issues, like her recent abortion. Victoria is a queen bee, and she can't be a bitch, but she also cares genuinely about people. She's capable of apologizing honestly, and she has issues with insecurity. Over the course of the next few episodes, we became involved in some little way or another in these people's lives. We had the opportunity, depending on how we played, to have Max get a deeper and more complete perspective of all of these people. We even got the chance to save some of them, Kate in a big way, and Alyssa in repeated small ways. Towards the end, even Nathan, the person Max disliked the most, was rounded off and made more human. We finally see him as a whole person, rather than the one-sided caricature we were limited to in the episodes before. He wasn't just evil anymore, he was a person with feelings and emotions and his own sets of issues. He was capable of remorse and regret. This made the final choice all the more heart-wrenching. How do you choose who deserves to live and die when you personally know these people, when you're personally involved in their lives and their journeys? None of them deserve to have their lives cut short, but life doesn't work that way. Reality is harsh. Death is almost never deserving or fair or timely. Unlike in reality, Max has to choose who she will let die, and since we play as Max, it's ultimately us who takes the weight of that decision on with Max. It's not the ending I had hoped for because Dontnod successfully made me care about everyone. They made the decision harder by making every life valuable. Enough so that the thought of letting any of them die put me in a state of almost denial. I tried to create ways in my mind that things could be changed or different, and similarly, Max fought to find the right combination of choices with us to save her friends and the people around her. Ultimately, even with her powers, Max's biggest lesson was to let go of Chloe or to suffer the consequences of holding onto her in a big way. We don't get to see more after our final choice. We don't get to see any future. We either see Chloe's funeral or we see Max and Chloe driving through a completely destroyed Arcadia Bay in silence as they leave together. The ending for saving Chloe felt unsatisfying in a way, and I feel like that's intentional. Max just chose to let hundreds, and maybe much more, die for Chloe. Chloe knows that Max made this choice to save her, which leads to the death of her mother and an entire town full of people she knew. Chloe and Max will both have to deal with that guilt. The end scene feels more like numbness than anything else. Emotionally, I felt more powerfully impacted by sacrificing Chloe. It was the right thing to do morally for both Max and Chloe, which is why it was the harder choice. I felt the intense feeling of loss for Max and Chloe's family, but I also felt a sense of relief. Because of her powers, Max had the chance to spend so much extra time with Chloe. She got to say goodbye, and she honored her best friend's final request. I felt Max would be able to move on from this experience and be better because of it. I did not feel that same sense of hope for either Chloe or Max when I chose to sacrifice Arcadia Bay. I was happy they were together and alive, but it still felt wrong to think they could be better people after being responsible for killing hundreds, maybe thousands of people, including people they loved, who loved and trusted them. Not to mention the implications this would have on Max and Chloe's relationship long term. If you were to ask me why Max got her powers, I would say that this was a way to prepare her, to help her understand that no matter how much control she was given over time, even she could not change the inevitable. She would have to experience and accept loss. Having the power to reverse time gave Max the opportunity to exhaust all the options she had until she no longer had options. The universe was practically shouting what her lesson was throughout the whole game, and as the storm continued to creep up, Max finally came to the realization of what she had to do. Either option is a great loss for Max, but loss is a natural and unavoidable part of life. On a last note, even though I said I really didn't want this ending, I do think it's the perfect place for it to end. Chloe and Max got extra time together they would not have otherwise. They both got the growth they needed and deserved, and although it ended on a sad note, it was brutally honest and real.